the CEO of a company, you have to be ready to adopt AI yourself. Maybe you're not as good at prompting as you think you would be, or at understanding how the technology can be used in your business.
Welcome back to Leading in AI by Agentic Ed. I'm Jericho, and this show I get to talk to some of the most interesting people working in the AI space. And my guest this week is Carlos Escapa. Carlos has spent over 1 decade in leadership roles at Amazon Web Services and Meta, building AI ecosystems and industrial alliances, and a lecturer at the SADE, UC Berkeley Haas, and Instituto de Empresa. And currently, he serves as executive in residence at Across Legal. So, Carlos, really glad to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to start with our first question, which is more on your journey. So you came from a background in infrastructure and virtualization, then moving to big data and eventually AI in the mid-2010s. And you describe it as serendipity and being at the right place at the right time. Can you talk us through that transition and what you were seeing at AWS that made you realize that AI was going to be different?
Yes, well, identifying the right moment, making the right decision, basically embracing the moment is how I would characterize it. Definitely a believer that is not so much what you prepare for as more how you react when the opportunity presents itself. So I guess in my career, I have been involved in infrastructure in many different ways, and then infrastructures started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, particularly in the early 2010s with the advent of mobile telephony, smartphones, IoT devices, and then cloud-based systems. So that was growing and growing and growing. And this quest for scale actually was partly driven by the fact that a lot more data was being collected. And that was the beginning of a big shift in the use of mathematical algorithms that we know as machine learning in order to drive predictions and then use those predictions inside of business processes in order to improve their quality and their relevance. And this is how we have hyper-personalized targeted advertising, medical care, medical analysis, the entire science around computer vision was beginning to happen in right around 2015, and that's when the moment came to work at Amazon Web Services, and I found myself with all of these technologies having to learn a lot of things very quickly. And then, it's just basically you ride the rocket from that point.
Nice. So yeah, mentioning about your experience, you spent nearly 4 years leading the AI ML global growth at AWS, and then 3 years working at Meta, in more focus on as a AI global business development manager, and then you returned back to AWS as a data and AI global practice lead. What were the key learnings at Meta that you couldn't have learned anywhere else, and what made you decide to go back to Amazon Web Services?
Meta was a leader in the development of deep learning models, particularly what we know today as generative AI. Today, and we're recording this in April 2026, they have fallen behind. But back in the years 2018-19, they sponsored and open sourced a library called PyTorch, PyTorch. This library actually is the one that is being used today to develop language models. And I was in Meta at the time where this intersection of dynamics, more powerful chips and data centers, more powerful models, and particularly this strongly held belief that as you got bigger, then the models would become a lot more powerful. That was all happening at Meta. So it gave me an opportunity to see all of these forces at play, the alliances that were being forged between Meta and Microsoft, Meta and NVIDIA, also Amazon and Google. These companies sometimes were competing, sometimes they were collaborating, and the PyTorch project was actually a big collaboration project where all of these companies collaborated. There were approximately 2,000 contributors to the project. This is also the power of open source. When you have so many people that are in companies, in academia, in government, they actually come together to collaborate in these projects, and this is how you get this explosive growth and this ability to add value in many different ways in many different organizations.
Yeah, actually, PyTorch, we use it in our AI and machine learning class, so it's actually very useful for us. And I think it's a really good contribution for, I would say, for practitioners and for people like me that I'm currently studying a master's in business analytics, and I think that's something really interesting. And what about the key learnings in AWS? What would what would be your key learnings at AWS?
Um, AWS and Amazon in general, there is a methodology to the innovation. A lot of people think that innovation is about being very smart and being inspired, and then you work hard and then you come up with an innovation. And actually, Amazon proves that you can actually have a methodology behind it. You can innovate with methods and with processes. And what my biggest learning from Amazon is actually to learn how to set in motion innovation projects and use certain techniques that are used at Amazon that frankly could be universally applied. A lot of people study them. They're easy to understand, but they require a bit of a cultural and mindset shift in order to be effective with them. But definitely, of all the things that I learned at Amazon, learning to innovate is what I would consider most precious.
Yeah, learning to innovate, I think it's a very important skill, especially right now when it comes to now with AI. It's very important to also have this critical thinking as well as creativity in creative mindset. No, right now. Um, and yeah, moving on to the next question. I saw in an article that you said that you follow different people that have different perspectives on AI, like Yann LeCun or Gary Marcus, specifically because they have a discrepancy and they disagree each other. Why do you think it's important to have these contradictions? And what's your point of view regarding AI?
Well, a good scientist should actually question everything that they read and everything that they consider, right? In order to become wiser and arrive at understanding the truth, you have to have you have to be open-minded. You mentioned earlier critical thinking, right? The scientific method was actually invented about 1,000 years ago by an Arab scientist called Ibn al-Haytham, and he actually criticized the Ptolemaic model of the universe as and he criticized a lot the people who accepted it without asking questions, without being rigorous about measurements and verifying the model. So he basically said, no matter how smart somebody else is, I'm not going to take them at their word. They have to tell me what they have done. I verify it, and then once I can make those verifications, then I can say, okay, I agree with you. You have learned a new, or you have developed a new law or a new theorem or whatever. And then this is how science should develop. So Gary Marcus, Yann LeCun, many other people have very contrasting points of view. Artificial intelligence at the core is just mathematics. There's no intelligence inside of artificial intelligence. It gives you that the impression of intelligence, but it is because it is a very crafty way of manipulating sequences of numbers. So yeah, if you don't take these different contrasting points of view, basically the technology keeps confusing you because it can lead you down in one direction, saying, "Oh my God, this chatbot actually can understand me, can reply to my questions, can give me answers," and then a few days later, you may find out that actually what they told you was made up or a mistake or whatever. So if you don't really get into the guts of the technology, you would be, you can easily get misled. And I think that a lot of people are at the moment a little confused about this technology because it's a little weird. It's something completely new, and it's sort of a crossing between cognitive sciences, mathematics, statistics, and computer science. So yeah, for me, it was important, always has been important to have these contrasting viewpoints so that then I could make my own and hopefully be more useful to the people who work with me.
Nice. Yeah, I agree with that because we have so many AI tools that in the end, either you learn it or you don't know how to handle them perfectly. So I think it's true that AI now should be more. We should, as a person, as an individual who's working with AI, we have to adopt it in the best way possible. No,
And you know, we're still learning how to do that.
we're still learning.
Right?
Yes,
It is not an easy technology to implement. At an individual level, you can get a bit of a productivity boost with it, right? But in order to implement it in business, and particularly if there are businesses that are critical to the functioning of society, you have to be really careful with it. You cannot adopt it willy-nilly.
Yeah, I agree, Carlos. So yeah, another topic that I want to discuss is about your book. I see that you recently published a book called The AI-Driven Business, co-authored with Jorge Calvo, and it's explicitly not about algorithms, but about leadership and vision. So I would like to know more on the book. Can you tell us a bit about the book that you wrote? How was the writing process of writing the book, and so on?
Yeah, so you know, AI didn't happen overnight. It's not because of ChatGPT that all of a sudden AI is a new thing. Far from it. And AI has been implemented for quite a long time. The first example that I have goes back to 1999. This is when the first recommendation engine was incorporated into the websites of Amazon. And even before that, some forms of regression and clustering and so on, different techniques were being used in different places. So there is a lot to be told about how the adoption of AI in business has been taking place, very often without a lot of publicity or without making a big deal from it. So we thought it would be important for business leaders to understand from field execution of AI projects, to actually tell the stories about simpler use cases, more sophisticated use cases, different verticals, different countries, different kinds of objectives. And one thing that we definitely learned is that as the adoption of AI was increasing in capability and sophistication, we very soon saw that you actually had to redevelop business processes and workflows. And then this becomes much more of a mindset evolution and change management capability. And it is not something that you can just simply expect to happen bottom up. You really have to have leadership from the top in order to manage this change. And I still see business leaders making the mistake of delegating to their CFO or the CIO to adopt AI. And they don't realize that doesn't happen. If you're the CEO of a company, you have to be ready to adopt AI yourself, and also you have to accept that you will probably be put in a situation of vulnerability. Maybe you're not as good at prompting as you think you would be, or at understanding how the technology can be used in your business. And this is why we wanted to write this book. It's very much about the human journey, about particularly those in positions of management or executives who are basically thrown into this situation where it becomes not only strategic, it becomes actually a matter of survival in many cases. If you allow the competition to get ahead of you, you can easily get disrupted with this technology. And that's why we wrote this book with a lot of use cases to illustrate how this is happening.
Nice. I would like to read the book. I'm very interested in knowing what potential use cases that could be applied about AI on companies. And you were talking about change management, which is very important when it comes to adopting technology. What do you think is the most efficient way so that AI adoption is more efficient and more seamless to integrate within, especially medium and large companies?
Well, there's no magic wand, okay? AI is a technology that is applied on data. Therefore, before you even consider a successful implementation of AI, you have to have your data in order. Your data has to be clean, your databases have to be clean, you have to have normally a data warehouse or a data lake, and a single source of truth. You need to treat the data as an internal asset of the company. It's part of the digital patrimony of your enterprise, and it has to be managed in that way. If you have junk data, or if it is out of date, it is incorrect, if you have data flows that break all the time, your data becomes stale. It doesn't matter how good of an AI you put in the back of it, the output is always going to be junk. It's not going to be useful. Therefore, taking care of the data is the first step towards successful AI implementation. Then, once you have your data in order, or if you feel that you have the data in order and you have good, strong, clean data, the use cases where you will apply it is going to be very much dependent on the vertical. It's also going to depend on the skill level of your organization. Typically, segmentation of your customers, understanding patterns inside of them, and again, this is going to depend on the kind of service that you provide. But for instance, churn analysis is very important. It's probably one of those use cases that have the highest yield. Cross-selling, super important use case. You can also look at automating self-help tools for customers. So instead of customers having to contact you or having to go through some sort of a process to talk to somebody, they can find answers to their own questions most rapidly. These are the kind of use cases where most companies start. You could add to that the personal productivity that I mentioned earlier, but to me, that's not a real use case of AI. A chatbot is like, it's like a better pencil. It doesn't move the needle for me, at least. And what I find is that it's okay to get some productivity increase, of course, in spelling, in translation, in summarizing emails, and that kind of stuff. It can be quite helpful. It can be helpful also to do some research with the tools. But what's important is for a business leader to understand that if that tool is also available to your competitor, then you're not actually increasing your competitiveness in the market, right? So you really have to integrate corporate information data that only you have used with AI in order to guide better decisions, more effective business processes, or create new market spaces where you can increase your revenue. So this is what a leader needs to be thinking about when they implement artificial intelligence.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carlos. And now moving on to these leaders, I see that you train over 4,000 executives at the SADE, Berkeley, EA, ESE, ACC Paris, and so on. And you've also been working or running the IA en los Negocios program since 2020 at the SADE, with over 1,400 executives going through it. So what's the one thing most of these executives get wrong when they start with AI? And what does it take for someone to actually change how they think about AI?
I mean, people come with many different perspectives about what artificial intelligence is. I very often have to make them unlearn what they think they know about artificial intelligence before actually rebuilding that knowledge in the right direction. For me as a teacher, one of the biggest difficulties is that we call it intelligence. That is one of the things that I have. I think a lot of people come to the classes struggling with the concept. They come with a little bit of concern, anxiety, or fear about the technology. So there's a lot of mythology around the topic. And I think that people's own prejudices are what I find to be the biggest obstacle. It's almost like self-imposed on adopting. And then I'm going to repeat what I already said, and that is you really have to look after your data. Your corporate data is where you build your competitive moat. Therefore, AI cannot fix your data. That's just not possible. You have to take care of your data very, very well and ensure that it is of very high quality. The higher the quality, the better that the AI will work to give you benefits. So that is what I would, how I would answer your question.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I'm currently working for a project that a company wants to adopt AI use cases. But one of the things that we have seen is that the company is not governing well their data, and therefore we have to focus first on building this data governance and all things related to data before building AI use cases for the company. So I totally agree with that because otherwise it's gonna be really like it doesn't lead to anywhere. So yeah.
Exactly.
And now looking forward, you live both in Europe and in the US, and you have worked on both sides of the Atlantic. Where do you think Europe is getting AI right, and where is it failing behind? And what should European companies could be doing differently to compete against, not compete against, but to compete with the US and China, who have a better adoption when it comes to this technology?
Well, the US and China definitely lead in the research of very large models, what are known as large language models or large reasoning models. But one thing that we need to realize is that in any technology, it's 90% of the value is in the implementation. And in implementation, Europe is not behind. Europe is at the same level as the US, I would say. I don't know the Chinese market as well. I definitely have the perception that that China is adopting very far and wide the technology, particularly in hardware. They seem to be more advanced in the integration in industrial machinery, robots and drones than we are in the West. But in business, in enterprise usage, and you can actually see that in the book, the examples that we have about adoption in Europe are just as advanced as they are in the US. In that regard, I don't have any worries, if you will. However, there's something to be said now about data sovereignty and AI sovereignty. AI, when it is implemented, it becomes supremely strategic to a company. The prompts that we put into the chatbots in particular could be used quite easily to come to a lot of conclusions about the health of your business, your strategy, and your future. Therefore, I think that for a lot of business leaders, for their most important thoughts to actually be leaving the country, being processed somewhere else, and then come back is unsettling, right? So AI sovereignty is emerging as a very serious consideration, particularly given the fact that the new US administration has taken a much more adversarial posture against the European Union. Well, actually, countries, not only Europe, also Canada, Mexico, and basically everybody else. So I think that there is a lot more to be done in Europe in order to have more of a buffer and have more control over the computing needs that are required in order to support the modernization of our enterprises. Same thing applies to the public sector, even more, I would say. For the public sector, you can imagine that the police or investigators would not want to use language models that are executing in another country, right? So this is an area where Europe is it needs to move a little bit faster to develop enough electricity, data centers, and infrastructure in order to be able to provide capacity to do AI locally.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carlos. Now let's move on to our last question, which is our signature question. Where do you think AI will surprise people the most in ways they are not even thinking about yet? Basically, where do you think AI will make people wowed because of the new because of AI?
Well, the answer has to be when the AI becomes invisible, and people's lives basically they just improve, and they don't see them. They don't see exactly, because AI is very deeply embedded into the way that the society works. So, for instance, if you have your genome sequenced, and then all of a sudden the Social Security starts to send you notes saying, giving you nudges about you should take this, you should eat this kind of food or this kind of medicine, or and give you very, very precise recommendations that are tied to your genes, then that is a massive step forward, right? You can have medicine that it is specific to your needs. And this now becomes possible because with AI, we can actually have correlation engines that look at your DNA and compare that with different chemicals in general that you either eat or you take as medicine or you inhale, whatever happens to be the delivery method. So this could be an area where AI could actually drive a massive increase in the quality of life, and particularly in the prevention of diseases. I'm hoping that this will be the biggest surprise for people. But it could be a lot of different things. Definitely in government, a lot of the processes in government are incredibly inefficient. They're clerical in nature. All of that could be handled now a lot more efficiently. If you actually start to shift a lot of the civil service away from routine tasks and they're actually out helping the citizens, that would also improve public services a lot. Maybe we can take better care of older people or people with a high degree of vulnerability, because we don't have so many people pushing paper inside of government. So this could also be an area where you could be surprised. Transportation, transportation is very inefficient, right? If you allow traffic lights to be synchronized so that when an ambulance goes through or a fire engine goes through, or is optimized to the movement of traffic based on the actual conditions, including meteorology, the time of the day, the degree of light. So life should become smoother without you noticing that there is AI managing it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carlos, for this insightful conversation and answer. I really had a great time talking to you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for hosting me.